Let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful presenters. So we've got Tyrone Goodwin, Luke Alexander, and Kevin Graham. All three of them are deeply knowledgeable about the genealogy and history of free people of color in Southeastern North Carolina going back to the 1700s. Tyrone Goodwin has researched Southeastern free people of colors for over 40 years. He concentrates on Pender, New Hanover County, Sampson, Duplin, Wayne, and Cumberland counties. And this is his fourth presentation in partnership with us here at Pender County Library. Luke Alexander is a genealogist and community historian with a focus on African American and Indigenous heritage in the Carolinas. And Kevin Graham is president of the Lower Cape Fear chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, and is the first African American to hold the office. So we're going to, for each presenter, most of them will have a video that we will play for their presentation, and then there will be a 5-minute question and answer section pertaining to that specific presentation, and then we will move on to the next presentation. And as I said before, we'll have a general Q&A. So any questions we didn't have time for the first time around, we'll get to those in general Q&A at the end. So we're going to start off with Kevin Graham, who is going to tell us about the Revolutionary War, Crispus Attucks, Primus Jacobs, the Sons of the American Revolution, and the Patriot John Blanks. So Jesse, if you could go ahead and start that video.
The first martyr for America, Patriot Crispus Attucks, a free person of color. Crispus Attucks, a free man of color, was born in Framingham, Massachusetts in 1723. He was a sailor, a whaler, and a dock worker. In the fall of 1768, British forces were sent to Boston, Massachusetts to control the unrest of the colonists following the enactment of the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act. On the infamous date, March 5th, 1770, after an altercation between the townspeople and several British officers, British forces opened fire, killing 5 and injuring 6 colonists, with Crispus Attucks being the first casualty. Along with Attucks, Samuel Gray, James Caldwell, Samuel Merrick, and Patrick Carr were killed. This event is known in American history as the Boston Massacre. As Crispus Attucks was the first person to die in the Boston Massacre, he is given the distinct title of the first American killed in the American Revolution, or the first to die for the flag. Attucks' final resting place is in the historical Granary Cemetery in Boston, Massachusetts, where he and the others killed in the massacre are buried in the same grave. Other notable Americans buried at Granary Cemetery include Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere. After the death of Attucks and the other 4 Americans, the British killers were acquitted of murder with the help of their attorney, John Adams, who would later become the second president of the United States. Many schools, institutions, roadways, park, bridges, and theaters bear Crispus Attucks' name in his honor. Noteworthy, in 1998, the United States Treasury released the Black Revolutionary Patriot Silver Dollar coin, which featured Attucks' image. Patriot Primus Jacobs of Danvers, Massachusetts. Primus Jacobs of Massachusetts was born in 1754 and served 2 years in the American Revolutionary War. He served in the Massachusetts 15th Regiment and Captain Samuel Page's company. Interestingly, Primus Jacobs of Massachusetts was not related to the Primus Jacobs of New Hanover County, North Carolina, born in 1760. Because there are many similarities between the two, many researchers get the two confused as they both share the same first and last names, and they both yield the call of duty and serve their country in the American Revolutionary War. For the purpose of this presentation, we will concentrate on Patriot Primus Jacobs, born in 1754 from Massachusetts. My cousins Tyrone Goodwin and Luke Alexander will later speak of Primus Jacobs from New Hanover County, North Carolina. Here are some official records. First, you would note Primus Jacobs and Diana Smith marriage records. Secondly, you would see the first 1790 federal census. Lastly, you will see the widow's pension money of $80 received by Dinah Jacobs. The National Society of the Sons of the American Revolution was founded in Louisville, Kentucky on April 30th, 1889 and serves as its headquarters. SAR is a 132-year-old non-profit, non-partisan national society dedicated to promoting patriotism, preserving and teaching American history to future generations. Membership is open to any eligible male 18 years or older, regardless of race, religion, or ethnic background, who can validate a direct blood lineage to a patriot of the American Revolution. SAR has over 550 chapters and more than 35,000 members worldwide. Members volunteer thousands of hours each year to local, state, and national events. As the largest male genealogical society in the country, SAR donates tens of thousands of dollars to students and youth as they prepare for their future with scholarships and funding. The SAR is very active in supporting active duty military and veterans in many capacities. As a proud member and leader of SAR, my goal is to assist in educating the American people of the sacrifice of the men of color in the American Revolution. Also, I would like to provide guidance to anyone wishing to join the SAR organization, especially those of color. With thousands of hours of research and study, I am considered a subject matter expert in genealogy and have a passion to assist those individuals who require assistance in tracking the ancestral Revolutionary War patriots via census record, tax records, will, and other documents. Additionally, with the advancement in the DNA testing, the SAR is now accepting DNA results to be used to establish kinship verification to a Revolutionary War patriot. In 2012, Raleigh firefighter compatriot Chaz Moore became the first black member to join the Raleigh, North Carolina chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. Moore traces his Revolutionary War patriot to Massachusetts soldier patriot Toby Gilmore. On April 28, 2017, compatriot Kevin E. Graham became the first black member and later chapter president of the Lower Cape Fear chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, SAR. Graham traces his patriot ancestry to patriots John Blank Sr., Ishmael Chavis of Bladen County, North Carolina, and Zachariah Jacobs of New Hanover County, North Carolina. Compatriot Lamar Buddy Hayes, the fifth great-grandson of patriot John Blank Sr., was the first black member inducted into the SAR Bethabara chapter in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Now I would like to take a quick moment to acknowledge our national, state, and local SAR officers. Current SAR national officers, current SAR North Carolina state officers, current SAR Lower Cape Fear chapter officers. On September 3rd, 2016, the Patriot Isaac Carter chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, SAR, was chartered in historical free persons of color community of Harlow, North Carolina, making history as the first SAR chapter comprising of a majority black membership. These members were able to trace their ancestors to one or more of the 14 Harlow patriots who served in the American Revolution. Patriot Isaac Carter chapter of SAR. Below, one of the original members, compatriot Edward Earl Carter, the third great-grandson of patriot Isaac Carter, served as its first president. Patriot John Blank Sr. My third great-grandfather, patriot John Blanks, was born in 1745 as a free person of color. He first appeared in the Bladen County, North Carolina tax list in 1770. Later, he will appear in the Bladen County tax list during the years of 1774, 75, 79, 86, and 89. John Blanks would be one of the earliest free persons of color in the state of North Carolina to own land. Being a person of color and a landowner in the 1700s was uncommon. However, on January 19, 1773, John purchased 100 acres of land in Bladen County and would raise his family next door to Abraham Freeman. Abraham Freeman was my fourth great grandfather, and his sons, patriots, William Freeman and Roger Freeman, would go on to serve their country in the Revolutionary War in Bladen County militia with John Blank Sr. On February the 15th, 1782, and October the 1st, 1774, John received his Revolutionary War payments for his military service. In 1790, John would be listed in the United States Federal Census as the head of his house, along with 7 other free persons of color. Of the 8 listed in John's 1790 Federal Census record, my cousin Luke Alexander and I have identified 6: John, his wife, his children Alfred, John Jr., Winifred, and Esther Blanks. John's descendants still live in or around the area where he purchased land nearly 250 years ago. They mostly live in the historical free persons of color communities of East Arcadia, Farmers Union, Buckhead, St. James, and Youngstown, North Carolina. John's descendants also migrated to Robeson County, North Carolina, and various communities in the state of Indiana. This is the 1770 Bladen County tax list, and also the first time that Patriot John Blanks is listed. Of note, the enumerator classified John Blanks as white, living in a household with Patriot James Ellis and Thomas Moore. This slide shows Bladen County tax list for the year 1774. Of note, Patriot John Blanks Sr. is listed nearby free persons of color patriots, my fourth great grandfather Ishmael Javis, John Hammond, Adam Ivy, Joshua Peavy, John Webb, and William Freeman, all free persons of color. This is the Bladen County tax list for 1775. Here we have the 1779 Bladen County tax list. Of notice, here John Blanks is listed with 100 acres of land, 3 horses, 5 cattle, 1 tract of land. The land value at the time is considered in British pounds. Here it has 150 pounds. The value of his horses is 200 pounds, giving him a grand total for his total assets, 400 pounds. Here in the 1786 tax list, it's looking very similar to a census. It's actually asking for the number of souls in a house. In John's household, 2 are listed between the age of 12 to 50, 4 are listed from 50 and under 12. Here in the 1789 tax list, we notice the enumerator once again classified John Blanks as white. This was not abnormal for free persons of color. Many times, their race would be changed from black to white and sometimes mulatto. This is the first United States federal census of the year 1790. John Blanks is the head of a household of 8 free persons of color. The next 3 slides will show 100 acres of land purchased by John Blanks in 1773, living nearby Abraham Freeman and Patriot Captain William Dry. Here you will see the 100 acres of land signed off for John Blanks on January the 19th, 1773 by Josiah Martin, the last British governor of the state of North Carolina. This slide will show John Blanks' 1782 Revolutionary War payment. This slide shows John Blanks' October the 1st, 1784 Revolutionary War payment. Below is listed all of the known battles and skirmishes that the Bladen County Militia participated in from 1776 to 1781. Eliza Blanks, the granddaughter of Patriot John Blanks Sr., was born March 7, 1820 in Robeson County, North Carolina. Her father, John Blanks Jr., moved the family to Indiana in the 1850s, where she died March 29, 1920 at the age of 100. Willis Blanks was Patriot John Blanks Sr. grandson. He was born on October the 13th, 1833 in Robeson County, North Carolina. He died August the 17th, 1912 in Madison County, Indiana. As I conclude, and as we only skim the surface of these topics, Crispus Attucks, Primus Jacobs, John Blanks Sr., and the Sons of the American Revolution, I'd like to invite you to contact me to take a deeper dive into either of these areas of focus. Thank you, Kevin E. Graham.
All right, thank you so much, Kevin, for that interesting presentation. Let's see. If anyone has any questions they would like to ask, they can enter that in the chat window and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I see we have one comment, and this is not an area of expertise for me, so I'm not, there's a person who's asking about, who says that John Blanks was a Tuscarora Indian from Craven County. Is that, do you know anything about that, Kevin, or is that possibly a different person? They also mentioned that some of the history you were presenting came from tribal research. Does that, can you speak to that at all? Do you know anything about that?
No, it doesn't ring a bell, but John Blanks was of triracial descent, combination of Black, European, and Native American ancestors. Many of his descendants to the present day are in multiple Native American tribes, such as the Lumbees and the Waccamaw.
Okay. So let's see. Looks like we don't have any other any questions. So I guess we'll go ahead and move on to the next presentation. And if anyone has any other questions that they think of later for Kevin, or that they didn't have time, or maybe you couldn't figure out how to use the chat, we can get to that at the general Q&A at the end of the presentation, at the end of the event today. So up next, Tyrone Goodwin is going to tell us about Free People of Color in Southeastern North Carolina as a community. So Jesse, if you could go ahead and start that.
Sorry about that. Hang on just 1 second.
So you see, Kevin Graham is expert on the Revolutionary War, especially in North Carolina. He's also a genealogist, concentrating on our shared ancestors in Southeast North Carolina. Now we'll pivot, and I'll talk about those shared ancestors as a community. I say shared ancestors and I say community because many of these men were from families that had lived and married together starting back in Virginia in the early 1700s. Pinley Rock Family Reunion people, for more information, you can check our previous presentations. And I challenge you to look at your DNA matches for these surnames. It's enlightening. Now, these were free men of color, not socially white and not enslaved. They were free men who fought freely. Free men who fought freely. By that, I mean, first, they volunteered. They were not abducted into service like happened in later wars. And secondly, they were not segregated into colored units that did menial or dangerous work and received less benefits. The next war we fought in freely was Vietnam almost 200 years later. You're surprised by that. You don't want to believe it. So, examples. My father was wounded in France fighting in World War II. He was in a segregated unit. came home to segregation and received less benefits than white soldiers. His father, my grandfather, was also wounded in France in World War I. He was in a segregated unit, came home to segregation and to nationwide lynching by whites who wanted to put them in their place. My mother's North Carolina first cousin started the Korean War segregated in the 2nd Airborne Rangers. He was wounded there, then assigned to an integrated unit where that third wounding killed him. So the Revolutionary War is important for us all to study because it's the war where men of color were free men who fought freely, just like everybody else. And the next war we fought in freely was Vietnam, almost 200 years later. Now let's explore what it meant for these men to have been free. If you've been to any of my presentations, you know I love a timeline and I love a spreadsheet. So this page doesn't surprise you. We'll look at the major free colored surnames from east of the Cape Fear River. So New Hanover, Duplin, Sampson, Wayne, Cumberland counties. I've grouped them according to their origin. To follow me, notice the timeline across the top of the page and note the meaning of the different colors on the rows. Blue denotes a white family, pink denotes a white parent of a free colored family, and tan denotes a free person of color family. The first grouping, which is the entire page that you're looking at here, is families who were either manumitted by local whites or who were birthed by local whites. And for that latter category, that was generally birthed to white women. And that is because a child followed the status of the mother. So white women giving birth to colored children produced free families of color. You will see that none of these offspring were in place early enough to have participated in the war. So these names that we all know and many of us descend from, yes, are free families of color, but they showed up after the Revolutionary War and as such were not patriots. This second grouping is families where I am not certain of their origin story. But you see, even here, of the 5, 2 definitely had patriots in the Revolutionary War, and 1 probably did. The Holmes, Zachariah, we believe was actually Jacobs. William Hayes, who fought, I'm not certain when he came into North Carolina, so he's on this page. And the Williams, we know that at least 4 families of free colored Williams were in the first census of 1790. Williams being such a common name, it'll take a lot of work to pick out any Williams of color in the huge number of North Carolina records. But we suspect that some of them fought, but we haven't found that out yet. And the Thompsons and the Boones, we can see them as early as 1800 and 1810. We're not certain if they were there earlier or if they were part of the folks that were manumitted. This last group is where you really see the impact of the story and the impact of what happened. This page is comprised of families that came into Southeast North Carolina as free persons during colonial times. Many of them were landed in colonial times, and so they were paying taxes to the Crown of England. They came from parts of Eastern Shore and Tidewater and Middle Virginia. And you see in this column, they all signed up to fight the British and create America. They were free men fighting freely. Some of these families were actually together and married each other and lived in the same neighborhoods prior to moving into North Carolina. The Jacobs, the Carters, the Hammonds, and the Webbs were all together in Virginia's Eastern Shore before they came to North Carolina. Even the exceptions here are exceptional. If we look at the Mozingos, American Mozingos descended from a man stolen from Angola and free in Virginia by 1672. But 100 years later, his descendants that moved into North Carolina identified as white and were socially accepted as such. So I don't count them in my count. Although Mozingo and Cumbo and Quander are practically the only West African surnames to survive in America, the first 2 families spawned prolific white branches very early on, as you see here. So I don't count the Mozingos because the ones that were in North Carolina were considered socially white, even though 100 years later, they were Angola. The Simmons, and I know I have some Simmons as part of this presentation. Hey guys, descended from Farabee Simmons, who was a 3rd or 4th generation free woman who came from Bertie County, so the northern part of the state, down into southeastern North Carolina, around 1760s or 70s. So although she had sons, they were not old enough to have fought in the Revolutionary War. And the Burnett's. There were free colored Burnett's that actually fought in the war, one in Dobbs County, which is a county next to our counties of interest. But I haven't quite figured out if that's the same Burnett's, because there were also a white family of Burnett's in our county, in Sampson and Duplin. But this page shows us that free men of color who had been 1, 2, 3, 4 generations free came into North Carolina and signed up to fight, free men fighting freely, just like everyone else. Now let's get a bit more specific. This is a list of individual soldiers we have found. I say some Southeast North Carolina men of color because this page is not a complete list for 2 reasons. One, these are people from my main county, east of the Cape Fear River. Luke will pick up west of the Cape Fear. 2, these men are not labeled as persons of color in the records. One of the very few times in American history, including your 6 o'clock news this week, where persons were not identified by color. So to find them, you have to know your people. Look in the records for your surname, see a guy with that name in your county, then find non-war records to see if he was a man of color. We'll cover this in depth in the methodology part of this presentation. Just know that we went back and forth between our family histories and pension records, pay vouchers, and land bounties looking for our people. And we found more than others had because we know our particular ancestors. I'm not going to read you the list of names. You can read here for yourself. I'm sure everyone is busy picking out their favorite surnames. As a Jacobs myself, I will say, wow. We fought like we were really getting paid for it. Seems like most of the Jacobs of age fought in the Revolutionary War. But you see here we have William Hayes, we have the Hammonds, we have the Manuels. I found 3 Brewingtons. They've been forgotten in the modern Brewington family history, but they were our ancestors. Another one I found interesting was the Winds, Ezekiel and Zechariah, brothers. They fought with the Southeast North Carolina cousins, but lived in Anson County after the war. Their descendants moved to Georgia and Tennessee and became white by the mid-1850s. Zechariah Wynn's pension record said he was born in Virginia in 1761, and his parents moved to North Carolina when he was young. So this is documenting the first arrival of the Wynn family in North Carolina. Luke, Kevin, and I are all DNA cousins, descending from many common ancestors. In the next section, you will see Luke add his people and Kevin's people to this list and this story.
All right. Thank you, Tyrone. Let's see. Jesse, are there any questions or comments in the chat window that you want to share with us?
Let's see. Not any questions, except what is the website he is using?
Hi, Latoya. Lots of websites. I use ancestry.com. I use familytree.org. I think it's org. We may get a chance to talk about this in the methodology, but also freeafricanamericans.com, Paul Heinrichs. Paul is, I don't know how many lifetimes he's led, but he has looked at everybody's records, and he has, use him as a pointer to source records. So he has a lot of information as well.
Yeah, I see Thorpe has asked, any connections to Maple Hill, North Carolina?
Yeah, Robin, probably, right? Because Maple Hill is a community in Pender County, for those of you who are not local to North Carolina. And we have been there, the Jacobs are from what we call on Cypress, which is near Pender Lee in Pender County. But, when people have been in place since the 1700s, they're kind of everywhere. Right, so we do have cousins in Maple Hill. So I don't know specific names that you're connected to, or that I could say are patriots, but these people are embedded. I mean, I live in DC. I was born and raised in Virginia. I consider myself a Carolinian because I know when I go down there, I mean, every one of those trees is over the graves of my ancestors. We are in the dirt.
All right, we have one more question from Cheryl. She says, she has heard some Black people state that they don't celebrate July 4th because we were slaves. The statement seems to disregard all the research your family has performed. How do you and your family feel when you hear this statement?
Well, I think Kevin and Luke are going to join me on this. That's part of the reason we're talking here, right? Is people of color really need to understand that America isn't just something that happened to us. It is actually something that we created, and we have every right to celebrate everything. And with those rights, also comes some responsibility. I mean, we say we're patriots, yay, we helped create America, yay. But we also have to say, in doing that, that was also taking it from the indigenous people, right? So we get to bear all of I want to bear all of the celebrations and all of the responsibilities.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions.
All right, so thank you again, Tyrone. So now we're gonna move on to Luke's presentation. Luke Alexander is going to focus on the soldiers in the war, especially Zachariah Jacobs / Zachariah Holmes. He'll get into that surname split and during his presentation as a free person of color patriot.
All right.
And Jesse's pulling up some slides for Luke.
Oops.
Okay, great, Jesse. Yes, and thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to focus on some of the individual stories on the patriots of color who fought in the American Revolution coming out of our part of North Carolina. And also focus on some of the ones that actually fought for the other side as well, for the British, to outline kind of what was going on in the individual lives of these men, in the late 1700s. You can go to the next slide, Jesse.
Go again?
Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please.
Oh. Is it not changing?
Nope, not so far, nope.
It's changing on my screen.
Okay, well, you work on it, I'll keep talking.
Maybe, sorry, real quick, Jesse, maybe try stopping your screen share and starting it back. I guess it must have frozen or something somehow.
Okay. Hang on one second.
Okay. Live TV, folks.
All right, let's try this again. Now?
There we go. That's the one I was trying to get to.
Okay.
All right. And what we did here, this as Tyrone mentioned earlier, he had a list of the free persons of color who were patriot soldiers coming out of the areas that are now New Hanover and Pender County. And they were among 133 that we know that came out of the county stretching essentially from Robinson County east and northeast up to Craven County around Newburgh. so and there may have been more. The records are not exactly complete, but these are the ones that we know of from troop lists, from the ones who filed for their Revolutionary War pensions, or mentioned other family members in their pensions that may not have been mentioned elsewhere, and so forth. Free persons of color, as Tyrone also mentioned somewhat, free persons of color was really a caste system at that time. It was a catch-all phrase for people of color who were not enslaved. So actually, under that umbrella, that includes African Americans who were not enslaved. It includes Native Americans who were not enslaved, and varying mixes of the two. Yet a lot of these folks on this list are actually a mix of African, Native American, and European descent as well. So that's why you get actually, if you would trace all the men on this list down in terms of any descendants they may have today, you will find a mix of multiple ethnicities that today's descendants of these men may identify as. Some identify purely as African American, some identify purely as American Indian, some identifies purely Caucasian, and some acknowledge a mixture of either one of the three. The largest particular clusters coming out of the region of Patriot soldiers, one group was one that Kevin mentioned, was the Harlow Patriots. These were a group of men coming out of Craven County, North Carolina, and particularly in the community of North Harlow. They had a large cluster of men who fought in the war, and many of their descendants participate now in the Isaac Carter chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, which is the first African American Center chapter founded among the Sons of the American Revolution. And the namesake Isaac Carter was one of the Harlow Patriots. Another key cluster, which includes most of the folks that are identified in the, what I identified on here is the Bladen and Robeson County branch, because Robeson County was created just after the war ended. So it didn't exist at the time of the war. It was incorporated into Bladen County. But most of the men in that territory are people that are heavily identified with the Native American community today. Many are acknowledged as ancestors of the Lumbee Indian tribe, the Tuscarora Indian tribe in Robeson County. And there are links with those men and others in other counties on this list to other tribes around there. In Columbus County, the Waccamaw tribe, in Sampson County, and you have the Coharie tribe. There are various other Tuscarora groups in the state that acknowledge ancestry from these men. There are tribes in South Carolina, the Waccamaw Indians of South Carolina, PD and Indians and so forth down there, who also share, may share, lineage with some of the men that fought in North Carolina, and then their descendants moved into South Carolina and other areas. So it's kind of, and it's hard. It can be hard to determine, because these men were thrown into this free persons of color category at the time of the war. It can be sometimes hard to determine exactly what ethnicity or what mix of African, European, and Native American some individuals actually were. Some of it's clear, sometimes it's not clear, but they were all thrown into this particular category that existed up until 1865 in terms of the caste system of enslaved people, free white people, and then free persons of color. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Jesse. All right, I also wanted to take a mention of men who made a different choice. From what we can piece together, the majority of the free men of color, particularly in our region of North Carolina, fought for the Patriot side. There's a couple of mentions. One member of the Patrick family from what's now Columbus County mentions in his pension record that he had brothers that apparently switched sides. There's also some records on some of the folks in Robeson County, just a handful that may have switched sides during the war. But for the most part, the vast majority of free persons of color that we can track fought for the American cause. However, when you get into searching for the records for enslaved people in our region. It's a bit of a different story as far as we can tell. Records are not complete at all. Of course, enslaved people are very poorly, records are very poorly kept. It's very hard to find individuals. But there are individuals that we know came from North Carolina who escaped from the state, ended up north, particularly in New York State, and then later were evacuated out after the British Army lost to Canada. And those men, there's 21 of them, who are listed among what is termed the Black Loyalists, which is a group of African Americans who were evacuated to Canada after hostilities ended in the American Revolution. And they were listed in Canada in a book called the Book of Negroes, which was drawn up to categorize these African Americans who left and eventually settled in Canada, particularly Nova Scotia, and others who, after Nova Scotia, actually migrated further to what is now the nation of Sierra Leone. There was a colonizing attempt by the British to return people of African descent to Africa in what's now the nation of Sierra Leone. The United States copied that formula some decades later in the 1800s with what is now the nation of Liberia. But at the time, these Black loyalists, many of them who had origins in North Carolina, eventually ended up either in Canada or Sierra Leone. In particular on this list, you'll see a name there, Thomas Peters. Thomas Peters was enslaved. He was originally born in Africa. He was trafficked to the Americas. He was enslaved in the Wilmington area. And then after the war, before, escaped, specifically because the British Army offered freedom to these men who were enslaved, who fought for them. There was a Lord Dunmore, and who issued a proclamation that any enslaved person who fought for the British would obtain freedom. So Thomas Peters, among others on this list, joined the British Army, fought in hopes of getting freedom, was eventually freed, settled in Canada, and then ended up eventually in Sierra Leone, and it is considered one of their founding fathers of that nation. So that's a glimpse of what was happening on the other side of that fight of the American Revolution. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. All right, I thought a good idea to try to drill down on what was, what life was like for, these individual soldiers, and a good representation of what was going on was to focus on the life of Zachariah Jacobs Holmes. Zachariah Jacobs Holmes, he's a direct ancestor of my co-presenter, Kevin Graham. He'd essentially be a multiple great uncle of myself and Tyrone Goodwin. We all share Jacobs' ancestry. And all of Zachariah, his brother Primus, his uncle Peter, and several other of the Jacobs cousins at that time all fought in the war. But Zachariah has a particularly interesting history in combat and in life afterwards, and we wanted to focus on that. Next slide, please, Justin. So Tyrone got into this a little bit, but Zachariah Jacobs Holmes was born into the Jacobs family, a free family of color, who had migrated to Long Creek, then in New Hanover County, now it's inside of Pender County. The Jacobs family, at least by that Jacobs surname, originated from Northampton County, Virginia. And the Jacobs would have arrived in the area of Long Creek around or just prior to the year that Zachariah was born. And as I mentioned, Zachariah, his brother Primus, his uncle Peter Jacobs, and several of their first cousins all fought in the war. And I want to mention that Jacobs family, their origins in Virginia, we know they were of African descent. They may have had some Native American descent in Virginia as well, because the family was based right near the reservation of a tribe called the Accomack Indians on the eastern shore of Virginia. And then also when they touched down in North Carolina, they would have been squarely in the territory of the Cape Fear Indians. But also at that time, the area was being traversed by a number of Indian tribes: the Cape Fear, the Waccamaw or Wokan, the Tuscaroras, the Congarees. There's quite a few tribes that were in the area. And we know that all Jacobs ranches today, at least claim some degree of Native ancestry, either in part or some in total, part of Native American tribes. So Zachariah, like many of the other men in the family of that age bracket, he enlisted with American forces with the Brunswick County Militia. And over the course of a 3.5-year period from 1778 to 1781, he did 3 tours of duty. And we'll get into what happened on those tours in a second. Next slide, please. So Zachariah had an active war record. When he entered the Army in 1778, he was in the Brunswick County Militia that was under the North Carolina 10th Regiment. Soon after joining the war, he marched out of North Carolina through South Carolina down into Georgia, where he fought on March 3rd, 1779 at the Battle of Briar Creek. Battle of Briar Creek, it's not one of the more well-known battles, but it was a particularly bloody battle. And it actually was a loss for the American forces. And Zachariah was lucky to have escaped from that battle, because the troops there suffered a extremely deadly ambush from the Tory or the British soldiers in that battle. And apparently it was so severe that he actually, that battle more or less ended his first tour of duty in 1779. So then he signs up again for another tour of duty in January of 1781. And in March of that year, Zachariah found himself squarely in the middle of one of the largest battles of the war, which was the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Zachariah actually suffered a severe leg wound in that battle. And while that battle actually it's now considered a win for the American side, because it actually is one of the battles that kind of broke the momentum of the British Army in the South. And had General Cornwallis kind of reeling after that battle. There was still a lot of British soldiers in the territory, in the between Eastern North Carolina and up to Guilford Courthouse, which is where Greensboro is today. So after he was hospitalized and was attempting to make his way home, Zachariah was taken prisoner by the British. He was forced to take a loyalty oath at the peril of otherwise being executed by hanging from the British major that captured him. So apparently he did that, but then of course he showed his true loyalty because he went right back and signed up for the American Army again in October of that year, 1781. And later that year, in December of 1781, he fought in another skirmish down in Fort Dorchester, South Carolina. Before he finally getting discharged from the Army totally at Christmas of 1781. And this is all of these details are the details that he laid out and were corroborated in his pension record that he filled out in the 1830s when he signed on to get his Revolutionary War pension. Next slide, please, Jessica. So after taking part in the struggle for independence, a successful struggle for the nation, if not for everybody in the nation, Zachariah came home. At that time, home was still in the area of Brunswick County. It's Columbus County now, the neighborhood of Buckhead, where there's still a large contingent of Jacobs in and around that area of Columbus County. I don't live too far from the Buckhead neighborhood myself, a few neighborhoods over. But he came back to that area. We think Zachariah had been married before because there are children that are older than the marriage that is recorded. But we know that he married one of his cousins, Sally Jacobs, in 1791. That was also detailed in the pension records, their date of marriage. By 1820, the couple had relocated back to Zachariah's birthplace in the Long Creek area. And that's also at the time, and this is why you see the two surnames, Zachariah started alternately using the surname Holmes. He will appear in census records as Holmes, although apparently because his military records were all as Zachariah Jacobs, that is how he continues to be listed in the military records. So, in his pension records and otherwise, you'll see him listed as Zachariah Jacobs. In the census and certain land deeds and whatnot, you'll see him listed as Zachariah Holmes. But it's clear that these are the same persons. After Zachariah died in 1847, you see his wife listed as Sally Holmes, living on Long Creek with her children, two of which, John and William, accompanied her when Zach died to get the widow's pension that she received. She had to go in and provide her own testimony to get her widow's pension when Zachariah died in 1847. The pension records indicate that actually the exact date that Zach died in 1847 and the follow-up, the time period that Sally would have passed away in 1861. Also in the pension records is an interesting note from a neighbor of the Jacobs, Caucasian gentleman named Josiah Sykes, who Sykes used the Jacobs to secure his pension. They were his witnesses, and the Jacobs used Sykes to obtain their pension. So all the men clearly knew each other from the time they fought in the war together, and they all backed each other up when they went to apply for their pensions. Sykes mentions Holmes directly in his pension, saying that the one man that can verify that he served in the war was, quote, the colored man on Long Creek by the name of Holmes. So that gives you a window into how these, or what was happening in the lives of these men as they're fighting. And of course, there's a lot of political turmoil as well. Zach would have lived through War of 1812. He would have lived through the Nat Turner Rebellion. He would have lived through the change in the North Carolina Constitution that limited the freedom of free persons of color, because essentially the white establishment was freaked out after the Nat Turner Rebellion. So, lived through tumultuous change and almost up to the period of the Civil War, the final breakdown of the status quo at that time, and ushering in a truly brand new era with getting rid of enslavement. And I think Tyrone is going to come back and touch on a little bit of that in terms of what we want to do with some future discussion on these topics. But essentially, that covers what I want to get to for right now in terms of what was happening with our soldiers, and one soldier in particular who has a very interesting war and peacetime record. So.
All right, thank you so much, Luke. It's super interesting. I see we have some questions in the chat, but I know we're also running a little behind on schedule. So what I'd like to do is hold those questions for the general Q&A, and we'll go ahead and move on to Tyrone's segment that where he's gonna tell us some about contrasting the role of people of color and the free people of color in the Revolutionary War versus the Civil War. So Tyrone, if you could go ahead and tell us about that.
Okay, good. Let's just go. To contrast the Revolutionary War, freedom from Britain, with the Civil War, freedom for enslaved, you have to talk about color. So let's look at when and why color became important in America. At the time of the Revolutionary War, the concept of whiteness was only about 80 years old. People on American, African, and European continent identified themselves by their country, their king, or their tribe. The same was true in the colonies at first. But by the mid-1600s, European immigrants wanted to treat African and Native people differently. So they needed a way to group the people that could receive the spoils of the land versus the people from whom it would be taken versus the people who had to labor for free. So race was invented, but it took decades to perfect. In the 1640s, John Punch was sentenced to permanent slavery for running away, while his fellow European runaways were not. In 1656, Elizabeth Key successfully gained her freedom as the Christian child of a white man. As a response, Virginia passed legislation opposite of the English laws that had allowed This is where my Aunt Lee would say, no good deed goes unpunished. About that. In the 1680s, Virginia states that Negroes, mulattoes, Moors, and Indians were not citizens, so not eligible for land grants. And finally, in the 1690s, America used the encompassing term white for the first time. The paint was barely dry on the American concept of race when the revolution started. When the revolution rolled around, Europeans already had a long history of fighting both against and with people of color. You see here some major North Carolina military action, and you can see how the English were aligned. European countries often switched alliances between themselves as well. Remember, English settlers had just fought the French in the 1760s, yet the French supported them in the Revolutionary War 10 years later. Native tribes also switched sides. The Cherokee fought with the English in the French and Indian War, then declared their own war against the English while the French and Indian War was wrapping up. The issue was control of resources. Europeans wanted native people's land. Indigenous people wanted to keep it. And the trade of beads, guns, livestock, furs, and humans further muddied the alliances between all of the parties. In this period of history, English immigrants would align with whomever met their objective of seizing and controlling the land. Alliances shifted as that goal was met, and shifted again radically after the goal was met. It would be comforting to think that the Revolutionary War was a kumbaya moment between the European immigrants and people of color. People of color were fighting freely. Settlers had taken all men created equal to heart during that time period. It was a brief but special moment of harmony. Nope. We all know that humans are complicated, and history rarely makes us comfortable. The colonists' Declaration of Independence was speaking to the rulers of England. All men are created equal is declaring to England that we, white, male landowners, are equal to you, British lawmakers. It was not intended to include women, people of color, or poor whites. So although free people of color fought freely, 100% equality was not on the table for them. Over the next 70 years, the concept of race metastasized. Legislation and education enshrined the notion that people of color were inferior to whites and therefore needed to be treated differently. Each uprising of men trying to be free, each abolitionist article, the establishment of Underground Railroad, the North's growing condemnation of human bondage, all served to widen the gulf between the South and the North. So by time of South Carolina's declaration of secession, the issue was all about race. South Carolina is declaring we, slaveholding states, are withdrawing from you, non-slaveholding states, due to your hostility over slavery. Battle lines drawn. America went from free men fighting freely in the Revolutionary War to color at the core of the Civil War. But color at the core was tricky, because humans are complicated. Enslaved people were the object of the war, and there were 500,000 free people of color, most of them in the South. How did these two groups impact the war? The alignment of men of color in Revolutionary War in North Carolina was practically binary. Many of the free men of color were 2, 3, 4 generations free. Some were landowners. They felt themselves a part of society and somewhat included in the we of the Declaration of Independence. So they joined the Continental Army. Enslaved men were promised freedom by Britain for fighting. They joined the British and Loyalists. The Civil War was a different story. Because color was at the core, allegiance had everything to do with one's racial designation and racial aspiration, and how bad you hated slavery. You will see enslaved men on the rebel side, either rented as labor or taken in by their captors. You will see North Carolina free men of color using the war to take their families over the color line. I mean, after all, no one would call a Confederate soldier colored. You will see men who walked to Canada to free themselves come back to the United States to put themselves in harm's way to free their brothers. And the North Carolina free people of color who moved to the Midwest, they fought either as colored or white, but they all lined up against slavery. The stories of individuals in these categories is fascinating. And the theme of free men fighting freely versus color at the core, and how that influences the aftermath of war, is something we need to delve into. And we will. Look for our next prezo in first quarter 2022, where we will concentrate on the Civil War perspective.
All right, thank you, Tyrone. That was great. Let's see. So we had advertised this event as running until 1 p.m. So we've bumped up against that deadline. I hope some of you can stick around. We're going to have a general Q&A, and we're going to get to some of the questions that we didn't have a chance to get to with Luke, as well as any questions and comments people have about Tyrone's presentation he just gave. And I believe we're also going to take some time to go into a bit more detail about the methodology behind this research. So if any of you have to go now, we're sorry to see you go, but thank you so much for attending. So let's go ahead and hop into, let's kind of take a step back and go back to questions folks had for Luke before we get to questions for Tyrone. See. And Jesse, do you see any questions or comments you want to read out from Luke's section?
I'm not sure which section they're from at this point, but there definitely are some questions, several comments and some questions.
I think there are some kind words in the chat for Luke and his presentation at around the timestamp 12:55 in the chat, and the stuff above that I think was for Luke.
Okay, there was, how does one get access to the U.S. military pension records?
Okay, they're available on two websites in particular. They're on the website ancestry.com, and they're also available on the website Fold3, which I believe they both, actually those two companies are the same, under the same parent company. But they have the pension records available with, of course, now those are subscription sites, so you're gonna have to pay the subscription to get access to those records. But those are the two primary sites that I've used to get a hold of those particular pension records.
All right, how would you confirm two different names is the same person? I'm going through a similar situation in my research.
Well, the first thing was trying, when we realized that there was a pattern there, we tried to see essentially, could you put the same person pop up twice, or could you put him, when he surfaced in a particular place as Jacobs, was he also at the very same record or time period? Did you find him as Holmes? And what everything kept pointing back to is this is the same person. And in particular, because he had the same people in his household. And there was a bit of a listing of the household in the pension records. But when you went to the census, you didn't find those same people with the surname of Jacobs, but you found the exact same household listed under the surnames Holmes. And this is something that has come into play, at least in my research, with tracking people after 1865 who had been enslaved. They pop up in the 1870 census and even the 1880 census. And I don't know if this is a pattern that holds sort of nationwide, but I just know that particularly in Bladen and Columbus County, enslaved people who are newly freed, and you keep in mind that enslaved people legally did not have surnames. So when they adopted surnames after 1865, that's when they obtained their freedom. It's kind of something new. And sometimes you find families that may start with a first surname, say in the late 1860s, 1870, and then by 1880, they're using a different surname. But if you look at, say, the mother, the father, and the children in the household, it's the exact same names. You can determine, oh, wow, this is the same family. The name they use in 1870 is not the surname they use in 1880. And it was a similar thing with Zachariah. Zachariah, in the places where we would expect to find a Zachariah Jacobs, we kept finding homes. And on the flip side, Zach clearly did not, there is a record where Zach Holmes, well, actually, there's two records where Zach Holmes is noted as being a Revolutionary War soldier, but when you go to the pension records and the troop list, he's not in there because he's in those lists, Zachariah Jacobs. So those are the kind of things you kind of look for. I mean, it's going to vary case to case in those kind of things, and it can be difficult because, you know, it's not common, but it's out there that you'll find ancestors who may have used, you know, different surnames over time periods, and may, you know, started life with one surname and moved to another one for whatever reason.
Thanks. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, Alan,
Yes.
can I make a comment, please?
Sure.
I'm taking a point of privilege, but, you know, for those of you who were raised, you know, in the African American community, you know, we have play cousins, right? So people who are not necessarily biologically kin to us. Kevin talked about Primus Jacobs of Danvers, Massachusetts, who is not related to my four-time great-grandfather, Primus Jacobs, but there were actually two Primus Jacobs that fought in the Revolutionary War, and their descendants are now play cousins. So we've met online, and I want to shout out to Beverly Hector Smith, who is Primus Jacobs of Danvers, Massachusetts descendant, and she is here with us, and I just think that is fantastic. Hi, Beverly. That was it.
All right. Let's see. I've got. Let's see. We also have a question from Alicia. She says, David Moore escaped enslavement during the Battle of Morse Creek. I'm interested in what relatives he may have left behind. And she added, I've also read that Cyrus Spear also escaped. Any information you have on any of that, Luke?
Unfortunately, no, I don't have specific information on that. Like I said, the aftermath on enslaved folks who may have, fought for the British Army in our region, it's kind of sketchy, to be honest, because I focus a lot on North Carolina. I'm not admitting to being a total expert on that in terms of knowing where every enslaved British, or Black loyalist may have ended up. And part of that deal is that most likely, if they were able to continue on with any modicum of freedom in life, that meant they left North Carolina. So, so their records may be elsewhere. Like for instance, that list of Black loyalist soldiers that I had, like I said, it came from Canada. You may not have the records still here in North Carolina for that particular set of folks because of the nature of the way the war went and the fact that so many people evacuated. But I'll look into it definitely, because I would be interested to find out more about those men who, especially if they were at Morris Creek.
Tyrone or Kevin, do either of y'all have anything you want to add on that?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right, great, thanks. Let's see. Let's see. So this is I'm not sure, I think this is maybe a question for Luke that just came in from Kimberly Thornton. Did you already talk about how you got involved in this research? I'm learning about my ancestors' her maternal side are Jacobs.
Okay. I didn't discuss that myself, but I got involved with this research because I'm involved with my family reunion, my family on my mother's side, which is a Spalding family. And the Spaldings originate in Columbus County, North Carolina, a community called Farmers Union. This is where I live at now. But I'd been involved with the reunion, and I realized that we needed internally within our family, we needed a little work on what we knew about our genealogy. And I'm going back about 15 years now. There had been some work done by some elders who have now passed on, but some work that had been done in the 1980s, and had come to realize that their work was not as complete as it could have been. So at that point, I realized, that it would be beneficial to the family if I kind of could step in here, because I had an interest in this kind of thing, and kind of started researching the Spalding family, which the Spalding family were a free family of color. The originator of the family was freed from enslavement in the early 1800s. He married into a family. The first Spalding married a Freeman woman. The Freeman family had been free as far as we can trace it. And then the Freemans are related to the Freemans and the Spaldings are intensely related to Jacobs. They're related to Blanks. They're related to Grahams. And it's kind of like, once you started tracing back, you can't do one without the other one. So that's kind of how I'm up into Kevin Graham and Tyrone Goodwin. Tyrone was dealing with primarily, the Jacobs and the related families in Pembroke County. Kevin Graham was dealing with his folks, in the East Arcadia community and in Bladen County. And essentially, when you get back to the Revolutionary War period, it's the same group of folks. So, who've continued to marry each other over and over again all through the generations. So that's kind of how I got into this, in terms of trying to help out my immediate family, and then kind of, learn about this extended family. And just one thing, I do want to mention something, because there was a comment or a question that came in before, and I know part of the question alluded to sort of it alluded to maybe that it's the way I read it was, maybe it was alluding that maybe that myself and Tyrone and Kevin may be taking credit for this particular research. And I just want to make it clear, we stand on the shoulders of a lot of people that came before us. We're just this generation of the folks that are telling the story, but the story has been told and retold every generation. So, and a fact is a fact is a fact. So, if I pull out that Zachariah Jacobs Holmes was a Revolutionary War soldier, he put it in his pension. It's been repeated. It will continue to be repeated in 1821, in 1921, in 2021, and hopefully we'll leave it behind for somebody in 2121 to keep it going.
Yeah, I agree with what Luke said. A fact is a fact, and people and nobody owns a fact, right? So the only person that owns Zachariah's pension record is Zachariah. He's not here, right? So me quoting the pension record does not mean I stole it. Anybody can quote it. But to further build on what he said, and kind of, I guess, to talk about the methodology as well, I don't want any of you to take what Kevin and Tyrone and Luke said and take that as gospel either, right? Because you need to look at the primary sources. That's what we do. We go to those pension records, because you have your own experience, your own family stories, and your own eyes, and the things that you have read, right? And when you look at primary sources, you might look at the same primary source that I have and get something different out of it, because there's a last name in there that I missed because it didn't mean anything to me, but that those people live next door to your great-great-grandmother. See what I'm saying? So that's the thing that Kevin and Luke and I bring to the table. We look at the facts, but we've also been looking at these facts for 30, 40 years each, right? So we're bringing all that to the table. When we look at a pension record, when we look at a marriage record, when we look at a census, we're saying, who's next door? I know that name from somewhere. Hey, Luke, do you know this name? I mean, literally, Luke and I do it all day long, right? So that's what we're bringing to the table, and that's what I'm encouraging you guys to bring to the table too. Just don't take my tree and copy it and say that's it, because I trust Tyrone, what a great guy. Go look at those sources for yourself, because you might find something I missed.
And to touch also on the statement that I wish a person would have stayed on and shared what they think was stolen. I didn't steal my DNA. I inherit my DNA from Patriot John Blank Sr. All right, so actually I descend through 3 of his children. So that DNA was not stolen. That's my 3rd great grandfather. When myself, Tyrone, and Luke, when we do the research, we're doing extensive DNA testing as well. And getting back to the Jacob, someone asked the question about how did you determine that Zachariah Jacobs and Zachariah Holmes were the same individuals? And my cousin Luke explained it wonderfully. But also, I want to piggyback that we actually did extensive DNA. So we are on Ancestry.com, we're on 23andMe. I just reached out to my cousin Tyrone last week. There was a Holmes cousin in their tree. They didn't have anything on Jacobs, but they matched with me on the Holmes, but their line the home piece go directly back.
Parenting, parenting. Parenting supreme.
Go directly back to the Zachariah Jacobs Revolutionary War person. All right, that's it.
Okay, great. I got another question here from Latoya Beatty. And I think this is something that any or all three of y'all could speak to. How do you go about handling adoptions in your family tree in terms of figuring that out? Or when a couple raised a child that wasn't theirs, but is listed as the parent?
That could be tough because sometimes that you may have to just literally go to your family's oral history, and because depending on what years we're talking about, there is going to be no adoption record per se, but that's a common thing. I think it's a common thing everywhere, and that's worldwide. But particularly in the communities that we come from, it's a common thing for children to be raised by other family members other than their parents for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons I know in my community, in my family, was that you might have a family that has like 13 kids, and then the sister and brother-in-law to that couple have no children, so they take in, it's easier for them to to feed those extra mouths, so you see that happening. It can be a variety of ways, but it is difficult to determine that in the records, because the records one of the things that I came into this research knowing is that I had both my grandfathers, mother's father and father's father. The people who are on their birth records are not their parents. Well, my paternal granddad, he was raised by his grandparents. With my mother's father, he was raised by a Spalding couple that adopted him. So if you were to strictly go by the records, you would, or what their birth records say or their death certificate says, you would be thrown off because you don't know that story. And sometimes that's one thing. It can be difficult, and you may just have to talk to people in your family, particularly your elders, kind of get the lowdown on, okay, what actually happened in this household.
Okay. Tyrone and Kevin, would either of y'all care to add anything to that?
Yes, I touch base on what Luke was saying. Even in my personal family and other families, when you're tracing your DNA and genealogical information, sometimes you would notice that the grandmother perhaps are raising their grandkids as their own child, because maybe the mother died at an early age. And once that child get of age, it's hard to determine if the grandmother and the grandfather is actually the parents or the grandparents. So like Luke was saying, a lot of times you have to rely on oral history, talk to older family members and get information from them.
Yeah, I mean, I have a DNA kit sitting in the floor right here that I have to mail off today to Pender County, North Carolina, right? On my Walker line, which is not a black line. But my cousin who does that part of the family has a new hypothesis that the Walker line was broken because it was actually the grandfather raising his daughter's child. And so I got my Walker cousin, he's gonna swab for me, and we're gonna do that Y-DNA test, and hopefully that'll shed some light. So using DNA tests, both the autosomal, and the ntDNA and the Y-DNA, that's important, can be important.
Let's see. Got a question from David Carr. He asks, what about free people of color who own slaves? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean that did happen. It was not widespread, but that was something that happened. It was legal for free persons of color to own slaves, and some engaged in that activity. And that may have happened for a number of reasons. Sometimes sometimes there were benevolent reasons, and people were using ownership to protect family members. They may have, there's a lot of combinations of how people became free. Some of our ancestors have been free since the 1600s, and then some, like I mentioned, my ancestor Benjamin Spalding, he was legally freed in 1825. So, slavery is well in place, and all over, and particularly in this region. But you see some cases where once someone, say in the 1800s, they become free, then they go back and they purchase members of their family. And that's a way to give them protection. I know Tyrone has come across a number of those cases up in the Wayne County, Duplin County area of that kind of thing happening. So there's that. And then there are some that honestly, not benevolent reasons. I think it's difficult and painful, and this is one of the things that as historians, American historians, we have to get into all the time is kind of sifting through very painful history. But for somebody in the 1700s and the early 1800s, you kind of have to wrap your head around it. There was no reasonable expectation in their lifetime that this institution of slavery was going to end. It just was the way it was. And many of them proceeded accordingly. And some, unfortunately, free persons of color, they owned slaves just like, white Americans owned slaves and treated enslaved people just as harshly as anybody else might have treated them. So that is a factor as well. So, so it's in our region, there was a couple of prominent free persons of color that owned slaves. But if you count through, the vast majority of folks who were free persons of color did not own slaves and seemed to, shy away from participating in enslavement. But, and then there's some that, there's a case in Bladen County that's quite curious. There's a man named Lewis Sheridan. His father was a white man. But his mother was enslaved to this particular white man. His father freed him. Lewis Sheridan inherited the plantation. He owned dozens of enslaved people. But he also, in 1838, he freed his enslaved people by participating in the program to relocate people to Liberia. And he actually purchased a ship, and all the people on his plantation went to Liberia in 1838. And a few of them made it back into North Carolina at a later date. But it's that's all the thing. That may be another presentation, like after we do the, just the one of the Civil War, a whole thing on free persons of color and how they treated it, enslavement as an institution. Because there's a lot of variety there, but it's a painful chapter. But yeah, but simple answer, yeah, there were a handful of free persons of color done on slaves. Sure.
Yeah, Luke's first point that he made about sometimes people would buy their kinsmen. He was talking about Farabee Simmons, who was in Duplin in Wayne County. I had mentioned her in my presentation. She moved in from Bertie. Her folks have been in Virginia. She was in Bertie, where she was born, and she moved to Duplin County in the mid 1700s. I don't know who the father of her children was. A lot of the online trees seem to think it was the man that indentured her. We don't know. There's no record of that. But I do know she bought her husband. Now, I don't know that he was the father of her children because they were old at that point. I forgot what year it was. But she's an example of someone that bought, their kinsmen because it was clear that she was buying her husband.
And actually, in my family, there actually, like Luke was saying, this is perhaps for another topic. Within my family, I've traced multiple family members owning slaves. Actually, my patriot John Blank's grandson, Michael, he he purchased perhaps his mistress out of slavery and freed her and sent her on a ship to Liberia. So in that case, it wasn't the type of slavery that you would think of with chains, etc. He bought her freedom and put her on the ship and she was sent to Liberia. Another situation is one of perhaps my fourth great grandfather, Gooden Ellis Bowen. He didn't buy him; he actually inherited. He was his father was white, his mother was of color, and he actually owned land from the Cape Fear River back to Lake Waccamaw. And Luke, but it was about 40 slaves he inherited after the death of his parents, the Spinlaws. So there's some, different perspectives on that.
All right, thank y'all. So got a question from Jim Wood. Is there anyone among you researching free people of color? And forgive me, I'm a lifelong North Carolinian, but I don't know how to pronounce these county names, Chowan and Perquimans counties in Eastern NC.
Chowan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's in the northeast part of North Carolina.
Yeah, my father's from Chowan County. He's from Edenton. I mean, and because of that, I've looked into that area a little bit, but I'm not nearly as expert in that area as I am in the Cape Fear region. My father's ancestors were from enslaved background. A lot of them, there's across the Albemarle Sound from Edenton, there's a large plantation called the Somerset Place. His ancestors, or my ancestors and I came originally from that community, and didn't really overlap much with the free persons of color in that area, but it definitely was free persons of colors in that region. And we know some people who, that's their focus, because they focus on, they descend and focus on those communities more so than we do. I think all of us, we kind of trace our particular set of ancestors from the communities that we were raised in down to wherever they were at. So we focus on Southeast North Carolina, but we also bring in, like, Indiana was mentioned in Kevin's presentation, and we have contingents of family that moved around the country at particularly early dates, earlier than you would think. Those relatives that Kevin mentioned that in Indiana, they got there in the 1840s. So, but in particular in Chowan and Perquimans, I'm not, as versed maybe as I could be, but I know some folks that do focus on that area heavily in terms of the free persons of color.
But I can say this: the DNA is matching up with us. We have been tracking some of those families that are matching. We just can't find out how they're actually matching our DNA. Some of the names are the Overton, the Brazils, the Halls. We're matching third cousins with them. I haven't looked at some of those names myself and Luke. Just cannot find the actual common ancestor with those persons in Pacoima, Pasquotank, and Chowan counties, and Hereford County.
And when he says DNA, folks, he's talking about the ancestry has the most data, but look at your shared matches. So often that we pay our money and you get it and you look at your little pie chart and you say, oh, I'm X% Nigerian, yay, and you're done. Well, that's only part of what you paid for. Look at your shared matches, right? Because that's very important. That can really help you with your tree. That can tear apart your family tree, or it can prove the hypothesis you've been thinking about, or it can bring in new people. You can keep seeing the same surname, showing up time and time again. You start to research it. So you've paid for that. So please use that.
And you can streamline the DNA matches to a particular territory or surnames. So if those particular areas keep popping up on Ancestry.com, Chowan County, then, if those same surnames, then you definitely can use that information to determine if they're, what type of kinship you may have with those individuals.
Yeah, I want to mention that the DNA backs up kind of what we know from the sort of the historical paper trail, the historical records in that. I mentioned this before in my presentation, but one good way to think of this free persons of color category is it very much was like a caste system. People being humans have always jumped these, sort of artificial boundaries of the caste system in terms of who they intermarry with or have relationships with and have children with. So, so free people and enslaved people, had children, free and free people, free whites, enslaved African Americans, Native Americans, whatever particular, there's always mixing. But in general, folks in that time period tried to stick to marrying within that caste system. So free persons of color tended to marry other free persons of color, and it would marry between free persons of color communities. So what we find in the DNA today is that communities in Northeast North Carolina and Southeast North Carolina and down into South Carolina all share DNA if they come out of these historically, communities that historically were made up of people who were free persons of color. Like I noticed someone in the chat mentioned that they come off of the a community down in Sumter County, South Carolina, where the chief surname is Ben and Haley, which is a name believed to originate with an Arab origin of Ben Ali. But now I don't descend directly from any of that family, but I'm definitely related to them because they pop up in my DNA matches on websites like Ancestry.com. And they were a community historically called the Turks because of, the mixture and the oral tradition on where their origins lie. But they share a lot of similarities with the other free persons of color community around the Carolinas. And the DNA is definitely matching. And sometimes the surnames match because they have Oxendine as a surname in their community. And Oxendine is huge in Southeast North Carolina, particularly in Robeson County. And way back in my, lineage, I descend from Oxendines, in the Native American community in Robeson. So, and you see that pop up. Some surnames you see cross all the different communities. It seems like Chavis and Goins in particular are found in all these free persons of color communities all up and down the East Coast. So, so that's another telltale sign of the shared lineage. And it all goes to that free persons of color were kind of steered toward interacting with one another up until 1865. And in many ways, our communities have continued to do that ever since.
Okay, let's see. So Franklin Freeman had a comment, and this goes back to what y'all were addressing a little while ago about contention around tribal ownership of genealogical records. So Franklin Freeman's comment was, the tribal piece will always be a fight in our family because of the split within our Indigenous communities, unfortunately. Just wanted to share that comment. Let's see.
Yeah, shout out to Cousin Franklin. How you doing, man? Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, when you're talking family lineage and what people have been raised up on in their families, for in some cases for generations, there can be strong opinions about who we are, what our origins are, and the family is so diverse. And like I said, we started out ethnically kind of mixed up. I mean, I know that, like, for instance, Zachariah Jacobs, I can tell you that he was mixed with, European, Native American, and African American. Now, I can't tell you exactly what the mixture, like how much of each, because the records in the 1700s don't allow us to know, to give us that specificity. But many generations later, we're kind of spread out among multiple ethnic lines, and there are multiple opinions about who we are and how we should define ourselves. So, and that's something we kind of, as historians, we kind of have to just, kind of gird ourselves and kind of dive right in, because, we can get into some heated debates about, what a particular ancestor's ethnicity was and how we should characterize ourselves now and that kind of thing. But you know, it comes with the territory. If we didn't have thick skins, we wouldn't be in this mix.
Let's see, and I see Tyrone responded to this in the chat, but someone commented, Robin Thorpe commented that she just matched with a Hoosier, which was their last name, from Indiana, and that she and that person matched through her Pender County family, but she can't figure out how.
Yeah, that goes back to what Luke was saying. You know, we match people. You know, I have a little category. You know, within Ancestry, you can color your match. You can put a little category with the color. I got a whole color for Midwest people because I match a whole bunch of people in Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, all of those folks that left Sampson County, left Southeastern North Carolina and moved out to Indiana. And to piggyback on what he said real quick too, also in Alabama, I discovered this whole group of folks that I never heard of called the Alabama Cajuns. They're centered around Mobile, Alabama. Never heard of them, but I kept finding these matches out of Mobile, Alabama, and their last name was Weaver. And I did some research and like, it's a free family of color down there. Well, a free group. So it's not uncommon for our DNA to point to people that, you know, have left our area 100 years ago.
Let's see, and I'll just read out this comment. Starts out with some kind words for everyone presenting. That we're doing it's a great presentation, and I'll be transparent. And this is my my father-in-law who is making this comment, and was very enthusiastic about one of Tyrone's previous presentations that he's done with Pender County Library as well. So he comments, "You make me want to research some of the stories I've heard about Daniel Chavis from Edgefield County, South Carolina, and Joseph Ben Ali, which I remember Luke mentioned a few minutes ago." And then he comments, "So much energy spent on division and definition rather than diversity and cooperation." Just wanted to share that.
Yay, father-in-law.
Okay, let's see anyone else. And Lisa Ann Fanning just comments that her family migrated to the Midwest almost 200 years ago in the case of her family, and that they also match a cluster of Creole families in the Baton Rouge, Louisiana area. And she says, "We are spread out, but still in clusters." So Tyrone, I know you wanted to just go in a little bit into methodology. And I know in the course of some of these questions, you've gone into that a little bit. Is there anything you want to add on that topic that hasn't come up so far?
No, I think the questions led us into it. You know, the questions about where do you find the pension records and that kind of stuff. So I think we're good. I do want to encourage people to support Pender County Library, though.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, to my cousins, whether you've attended the other 3 presentations or whether this is your first time, the library is very supportive of us. The first one I did in person, that must have been 2016, 17 or so. And the last 3 have been Zoom. You know, it's a great use of my Pender County cousins' tax money, right? It's nice when you pay your taxes and you actually get something for it. So Pender County cousins, you should be really happy. But you guys also know that libraries are, you know, kind of the stepchildren of a state budget. So feel free to support Pender County Library because they deserve it.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate that. If anyone feels inspired to do that, if you go to our homepage, penderpubliclibrary.org, if you scroll down, it lists our Friends of the Library in a big green box. You can click on that. We have 2 different Friends group. There's one that's for Burgaw and one for Hampstead. So you can find that information on our website if you are so moved. All right. Well, I know we've run a bit long. It's been absolutely fascinating as usual. Is there anything else, Tyrone, Luke, or Kevin, that y'all would like to add before we close for today?
Just want to thank everyone for jumping on the Zoom call today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been excited as I saw, as I heard how many people were coming, I've been excited and I was not disappointed. I really appreciate you guys' attendance and your comments.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. As I mentioned this in the chat, we're going to have this recording available on Pender County Library's YouTube page. I posted that link in the chat. So I'm going to post it one more time to make it easily available again. So we'll be uploading that sometime later today, and you'll be able to access it there. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll just like to thank our presenters again. Thank you so much, Tyrone, Luke, and Kevin. Absolutely wonderful, fascinating information. And thank you so much, Jessie Neal, one of our library staff members, for helping out on this presentation. She's been very helpful. And once again, I'm Alan Phillips Bell, the director at Pender County Library. Thank you all so much and have a good day.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Al.